Does your iPhone ever feel more in control of you than the other way around? It's just a phone, and yet somehow it holds so much of our time, energy, and focus. For me, around the same time that I quit Instagram and TikTok, I decided that I wanted to seriously quiet the clutter that was coming from my phone. Because while I love the way that it allows me to work, play, and stay connected, more often than not, it was leaving me with this lingering feeling of overwhelm, and I just couldn't explain why. That low-level tension, though, was definitely my personal wake-up call, because I eventually realized that my phone had become this place of constant input, and it didn't have to be that way. So just like I would declutter any messy drawer or closet in my home, I decided to simplify my iPhone. And what started as a few small changes ended up completely transforming the way that it feels to use my phone. Calmer, cleaner, and finally aligned with the life that I want to live. So in today's video, I'm walking you through exactly how I decluttered and simplified my iPhone, from the way that I arrange my home screen to the settings that I use to protect my time and peace. If you're also looking for ways to simplify that little device in your pocket, I hope you stick around. Decluttering my home screen was the first step because it just felt like the most obvious one to take in the moment, and it's what stares right back at us every single time that we open up our phones. So for me, even though I had a whole bunch of different folders for categorizing and organizing my apps, there was still just a lot of visual stimulation happening every time I unlocked my phone, and I realized that a lot of it was super unnecessary and non-essential. So I started deleting the apps that were unused or infrequently used, and I also started paring down how many folders I actually had on my home screen. Now I just have the apps that I'm using on a daily basis in my home screen, and I have 1 or 2 folders at a time to organize the things for a specific season in my life. For example, right now I've got a few pregnancy apps that I'm using, so I've got those organized into one folder, and that is the only one that I have at the moment. I also just use one home screen page. I do not have multiple. For you, this might be something that's useful if you use your phone for personal and work purposes. You might have one that is for all of your personal apps and another that is for work. That's where I can see it being really useful. But for, your average person with an iPhone, I feel like using multiple pages also just adds to the visual clutter and the overwhelm that can happen when you are scrolling through so many apps and pages at a time every time you open up your iPhone. The visual quiet once you declutter your home screen is instant, and I think it's a really necessary step if you want to simplify your iPhone. Now, don't get me wrong, I do still have quite a few apps that I use infrequently or that I'm not using every single day, but like to have on my phone for when I need them. For example, one great thing here is parking apps. I always pay, by my phone if there's an option to. So I do have a couple of apps where I really don't need them on my home screen, but I still want to keep them around. And so this step is utilizing the app library. Essentially, when you scroll left on your iPhone, it's this massive library of all of your apps, and that is where the ones that are not on my home screen live. I think this is definitely another essential step to simplifying, because it allows you to keep those apps that you are using from time to time without having them be so in your face on the home screen. There are still some apps that I download from time to time and end up forgetting about because they're in my app library and they're not right in my face on the home screen. And for these ones, I set up the setting in iPhone that's called offload unused apps. And essentially it just helps me declutter those unused apps passively. So I don't need to constantly be going through everything that's on my phone, because I know that if I'm not using that app anymore, the iPhone is just going to offload it for me. So this is a very easy step to take, and it prevents you from accumulating all of that app clutter. Like a lot of other people, I was still being pulled into my phone from time to time by way of notification. And even though I, mostly have all of my notifications turned off, there are sometimes those odd apps that end up sending me notifications that I didn't intend to be sent. So those are the things that I started simplifying next, and I pretty much just turned off badges, banner notifications, pop-ups, previews for, I would say, 95 to 98% of my apps, because it's just unnecessary, and I want to be in control of when I am going into an app, unless it is something like Slack for work where there's something time sensitive. I don't need a notification for my email, for example, because that's something that I can check on my own time, and I know I will be checking. I don't need it to be interrupting my day. Another useful setting here is the scheduled summary setting, which allows you to actually schedule when you want a summary of your notifications. So if you prefer to have notifications for email, for example, or maybe you have a sports app or some type of update that you like to get daily, you can schedule when you receive those in a summary so that they're not constantly being thrown at you throughout the day. And I think this is one way to be really intentional about the way that you use your iPhone. There have been studies that have shown when you have that little badge of how many notifications you have on an app, it's really difficult to actually ignore it because the brain wants to complete the step of making that badge disappear. So that is one thing that I always keep in mind, and that's why I do not use badges for any of my apps and notifications. One of my favorite settings on the iPhone is the focus modes, because we get to control how we want our iPhone to behave during different parts of our day. So for me, the one that I use most frequently is the sleep mode, and I turn this on right before bed or even a little bit before bedtime. I can change the background color, so I just have it on pitch black so it's not, distracting me with light. I have all of my notifications turned off. You can really customize it to behave in the way that you want it to. You could do things for mom time, a focus mode for work when you don't want certain people reaching you. You could even have one for, when you're with your kids, family time, where you're only accepting emergency calls. This is the way that we can make our iPhones adapt to us and not the other way around. Another decluttering step for my iPhone that I've taken is setting a boundary by using screen time settings. This I primarily use for the social media that I have on my phone from time to time, which is Pinterest and YouTube, because I do find that it can eat up a lot of time without me really noticing while I'm in the act of scrolling or watching something. So after about 15 to 30 minutes, and this is, allotted throughout the day, it will just gently give me that nudge to let me know how much time I've been spending on the app. And it's not, a super strict and restrictive rule, but it just gently reminds me, which I really appreciate. And it can be really helpful when you want to have downtime as well. There is a downtime setting on the iPhone. And so I do use that as well, where I'm not actually going to be using those apps after a certain point in the day. I think this has also just allowed me to be more aware of my usage patterns of social media and certain apps. I think we all know at this point in time that apps are designed to grab and keep our attention, and that includes the colors that apps use to visually stimulate our brains. So a couple of settings that I use sometimes to just prevent that addictive side of the iPhone and kind of allow myself to be in control is grayscale mode and dark mode. I definitely don't use grayscale a lot, but if I find that I'm just super distracted for some reason during my day, that is when I'll turn it on, and it pretty much puts everything in grayscale so you're not, allured by the apps that you're seeing. And then dark mode is something that I use pretty much every day, at least for the evening time where, the lights are lower and I don't need that bright light in my eyes. But you can also use it during the day if you're just feeling like you are being too visually stimulated by your iPhone. It's kind of a nice reminder when you're using these settings to treat your phone like a tool versus a toy. Do you remember that time where everybody was highly curating their iPhones with all of these fancy widgets and settings? I'm pretty sure it's when widgets came out the first time on iPhone, and everyone was just making their iPhones super aesthetic. I'm sure a lot of people still do that, and I totally got swept up in that, adding widgets here and there and a whole bunch of things that essentially were just clutter on my home screen. And so now I am just really intentional about how many and which widgets I'm using in my iPhone, because I don't need more things trying to steal my attention. I keep things that are genuinely useful as widgets, like the weather app if I want to quickly see what the temperature is or what the weather's going to be like in a couple of hours. I keep a parking app that I use frequently so that I don't need to go and search for it every time I need to park my car, and it just helps to keep my phone streamlined and simple. Unless you're always like scrolling through your phone or spending a whole bunch of time on your widget screen, I feel like widgets like photos, for example, that are constantly rotating are not super necessary, at least for me on my phone. If I had that, I would be spending probably a little bit more time just staring at my phone throughout the day, which there's nothing totally wrong with that. It's just not how I want to personally spend my time. So I'm not going to set my iPhone up in a way that encourages me to do that. These changes did not happen all at once, and I do still tweak the settings on my iPhone from time to time, as we should be able to as life changes, but they were gradual shifts that have allowed me to reclaim a sense of calm in how I use my iPhone. And it turns out that decluttering my iPhone was not just about tidying it up or turning off notifications, it was about being intentional with my attention and kind of taking back the control of where my attention was going throughout the day. So if you're in a season of wanting less noise, less pull, and a little bit more peace, I hope that this gave you a gentle place to start. And if you're curious about where my digital minimalism journey started, I will link a few videos below about how and why I quit social media, because that was my huge turning point. Thank you for joining me today, and I will see you in the next one.